Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Frustrated Book Purists. Now, before I start, I just want to reiterate that these are my own opinions and not the opinions of the Rehoboth Beach Public Library. So, as you might have guessed from my outfit, just in time for Halloween, I have decided to talk about one of my favorite books, which has been adapted many times, Bram Stoker's Dracula. As I said, it's been adapted through many movies and a couple of TV shows, but I've never found an adaptation that's left me feeling fully satisfied. Nothing that's ever had me go, yes, this is the definitive adaptation that everyone should see. There's the one that almost had it, the one that I find to be really enjoyable, even if it's not that faithful to the book, the one with Bela Lugosi in it, and a number of adaptations that feel less like adaptations and more like book homicides. Now, I've been trying to figure out which one to stake for this video, and when I asked around, the general consensus was do all of them. That's not going to be easy since there's a lot that could be covered with just one movie. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break this video down into sections. I'm going to talk about what the original book was about, some of the changes that were made in each of the movies, and then I'm going to go over which trends or changes that I've noticed over the course of these movies that I find to be the most frustrating and explain why. So due to timing, I don't think I'll be able to cover everything in one video, but I'll do my best. Okay, so Dracula was written by Bram Stoker and first published in 1897. It kicks off with a young solicitor named Jonathan Harker who is traveling to Transylvania for what he thinks is a routine business trip. He meets Count Dracula in his castle and goes over the purchase of an estate and gradually starts to realize over the course of a couple of days that there are some weird things going on with Dracula. And even worse, he realizes that he's being kept prisoner there. After a couple of months, Dracula leaves for London, and we don't know exactly what's happened with Jonathan because the narrative switches over to his fiancee, Mina. And strange things starts happening with her best friend, Lucy, who has fallen mysteriously ill. And the only thing that the doctors know is that she's lost a lot of blood and she's got these 2 marks on her neck. So her worried friend, Dr. Seward, consults with his mentor, Van Helsing. Van Helsing quickly realizes this is a vampire attack, but he can't quite let on because he knows nobody's going to believe him. So there's a lot of back and forth with Van Helsing and Dr. Seward desperately trying to save Lucy, and eventually, with some help from Lucy's fiance Arthur, their American cowboy friend Quincy Morris, and the Harkers, Jonathan and Mina, they team up to avenge Lucy and put a stop to Dracula. Alright, so I am going to be discussing the following film and TV adaptations of Dracula. Nosferatu, the 1931 Dracula starring Bela Lugosi, Horror of Dracula with Christopher Lee, Count Dracula, the BBC 2-part miniseries, the Frank Langella Dracula remake, Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, the Masterpiece Theater Dracula made in 2006, the NBC series, and Netflix Dracula that just came out this year. I will not be talking about Van Helsing or Castlevania, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, or any of those Dracula stories that just have him as a featured character and aren't based off of the book. There's also a remake of Nosferatu and a film that stars Jack Palance that I haven't seen yet, so I won't be going over them. But as is, I think I got enough material here for a video essay. And now I'm going to go over some of the general themes that crop up in these adaptations that I don't like. Starting with Dracula being reinvented as a romantic antihero. Before I continue, I just want to let everybody who's watching know I'm about to talk about some serious adult topics that are potentially triggering to some people, including sexual harassment and rape. So if that triggers you or you don't want to hear about that for any reason, please back out now because I am going to be talking about this stuff. It's kind of hard not to when I'm talking about what happens in the book versus what happens in so many of the movies. All right, still here? Let's roll. So, before I really get into Dracula as romantic hero, I want to talk about Mina Harker, the heroine of the book and the leading lady of many of the movies and TV shows. So, Mina is Lucy's best friend, and she's engaged to Jonathan. And she is one of my, if not my all time favorite character in classic literature. She's so smart and brave and capable. She is not the screaming damsel in the Bela Lugosi films or some of the other earlier Dracula films. She what she does is she starts keeping a diary during her vacation in Whitby with Lucy. So she ends up recording a lot of what happens early on when Lucy is first bitten and starts experiencing the symptoms of a vampire attack. When Jonathan escapes, she goes to take care of him and they get married. They have a very healthy marriage, by the way. It's not what unfortunately ends up happening in the movies where he's this like stiff proper British man who's suppressing her and stuff. It's not like that. They are very open and supportive of each other and they're honest with each other. And there does come a point where everyone decides we need to keep Mina in the dark because she's a woman and a delicate little flower and she can't handle all this vampire stuff. And he's in on that too, but he's noticeably uncomfortable with that. He's like, I don't like doing that. We're husband and wife. We don't keep secrets from each other. And she kind of goes along with it too, but she's like, I really don't think this is a good idea. I think we all need to be in on the Dracula hunting plans. If we're divided up like this, it's not going to end well for us, which it doesn't. But so going back to Mina, she is actually the one that she's like, in many ways, she's the brains of the operation. Van Helsing is too. Van Helsing's the leader of the group. He's the one that figures out that it's Dracula. He's the one that organizes all the people in their group to hunt this vampire down. But he wouldn't have been able to get anywhere without Mina. He comes up to her and says, like, look, I know you're a friend of Lucy's. Do you know anything that might have happened to her this summer? And she's like, yeah, I got the diary right here. And by the way, here's my husband's journal. And Van Helsing's like, oh my gosh, like this explains everything. Now I know who Dracula is and I know where he lives. And Mina realizing this is like, you know what? I should get together everybody's notes about what happened. I got to get Dr. Seward's diary. I got to get all Lucy's diary, my diary, Jonathan's diary, all the notes, all the newspaper clippings. And with some help from her husband, she types them all out on her typewriter and gets them all together into what is basically the book up to that point. And, here, everybody, here's a compilation of all the events that have happened. And because of that, they're able to figure out, like, where he's staying and that he's literally, like, living right across the street from the sanitarium that they're all staying at. So, yeah, Mina plays a really important role in bringing Dracula down, organizing all their information, but she's also very smart too. I'm gonna talk about Dracula's attack on her in a second, but she's able to use that. She kind of turns the tables against him, And even without that connection that they eventually have, she's able to just look at their notes and figure out where Dracula is fleeing to, and also a pretty good guess of how he is going to get there. So whenever they get Mina involved in the plans, it's pretty awesome. Uh, so, but so that being said, going back to, she does get bitten by Dracula in the book, and what the movies either allude to it or they don't show it, or especially in the later stuff with like Frank Langella and Francis Ford Coppola and stuff like that, they treat it as this consensual thing, that it's this romantic act between the two of them where he bites her and then she drinks some of his blood and now they are one and united and stuff. And oh, isn't it just so romantic? Yet no, it is not romantic in the book. It is not romantic in the book at all, and it really gets under my skin. I genuinely do not understand why. And it's not even just the movies too. There's a ballet that's like it does the whole Mina is Dracula's reincarnated wife. There's the official sequel, Dracula the Undead, that has them in a romantic relationship. There's a book, I haven't read the whole thing. It was like Anno Dracula, and it was kind of like a what if story where Dracula wins, and it mentions that during that time the Count was seducing Mrs. Harker. And no, there is a difference between seducing someone and doing what Dracula does, which is Dracula comes into her bedroom while she is asleep and puts her husband in a trance. The first couple of nights, he puts her in a trance and feeds off of her without her knowing it. She's got like, she gets these nightmares. She has a vague, uneasy sense that something really bad happened to her, but she doesn't know what it is. And then I think it's like the third night, Jonathan's in bed with her. Dracula puts her in puts Jonathan in a trance, and he tells Mina that if she screams, he will kill Jonathan, and also that she might as well just be quiet and put up with what he's about to do to her because he's done it to her before, and he's probably going to do it again. It's really disturbing. And when the rest of her friends, with Van Helsing in the lead, come in on her, they find him gripping her so hard that he leaves red marks on her hands, and he's opened up a cut in his chest and is smashing her head into his chest so that she has to drink the blood or else she's not going to be able to breathe. And she describes all of this to them after they've chased Dracula out, and she's struggling not to break down. She keeps like, the book describes her like rubbing her lips as though to cleanse herself of pollution. That's how it's described. And she says that he like talks to her in this like mocking tone, and he makes it clear there are two reasons why he is doing this to her. One is to punish her for trying to thwart him, and also because he knows that she is so beloved by all the men in the group, platonically. It's like a found family sort of thing they have going on. And he knows it's going to hurt them if he hurts her. And he says, as punishment, because she is being forced to drink his blood, they have a psychic connection now, kind of like Harry Potter and Voldemort having their like psychic link. And he says, from now on, like, if I order you to do something, you're going to have to do it, because she's been poisoned with his blood. And it's just very disturbing, and she's trying to like keep herself together, but she's also like crying and like screams a couple times and is just like saying like, God, why did this happen to me? So yeah, it basically, it reads like a rape scene, and I don't understand how people apparently look at that and they're just like, oh, how cute, they're in love. They're not in love. And so throughout the course of the book, there is this very real danger that Mina is going to turn into a vampire because she's drank some of Dracula's blood. She's got that coursing through her. And she fights it every step of the way. Whenever she feels like he doesn't have power over her, usually like at sunrise or sunset, as soon as she has the chance, like she tells them things that she knows she won't be able to tell them when she's under his control again. Like, hey, like it would be a good idea not to confide in me about the plans right now because he's gonna see them. Or she comes up with this idea to have Van Helsing hypnotize her every sunrise and every sunset. And she's basically using that psychic connection they have to, while she's hypnotized, she can answer any questions about where he currently is and what he's doing. So because of that, they are able to figure out that Dracula decided to escape and flee back to Transylvania. And I mean, it's not, the book's not perfect. There is definitely like Mina and Lucy tend to gush a lot about how wonderful the men in their lives are and how women are so undeserving of good men. And that wouldn't fly in 2020 and it shouldn't fly in 2020. But I just can't help but notice that all these adaptations of Dracula and none of them showcase this what I think find to be a very empowering story about one woman like fighting back against this vampire that attacked her and turning the tables against him. And she is supported all the way by her husband and her friends, like when she calls herself unclean and I must be like shunned by God and all this stuff. And they're like, no, that's nonsense. I mean, she does start to display traits of the vampire, like she's repelled by holy relics and things like that, but they're all like, no. All of her friends are like, no, you are a good person who just had a terrible thing happen to you, and we are going to get this guy. And like, this is a book that was written in 1897, and it's just wild. And I love that about the book, and I really wish more adaptations covered it. And the other thing is, what's kind of weird is when the movies turn Dracula into Mina's love interest, I notice it's like they want to have their cake and eat it too. The only one that I can say is a little bit okay is NBC's series Dracula, because that Dracula and that Mina are so different from their book counterparts that it almost doesn't even matter. But like the one with Frank Langella and the one directed by Francis Ford Coppola with Gary Oldman, it's like they still want to have their horror movie with Dracula as this creepy monster, but they also want to have him as this romantic love interest. And the results are just weird. It kind of makes Mina look like this heartless person that doesn't care about the fact that Dracula murdered her best friend and, in the case of the Coppola movie, psychologically tortured her husband. Like, the Frank Langella one is weird because it has, so Mina dies and Lucy is just devastated, and she talks about how she'll never be happy again. She misses her best friend so much, and you feel for her, like, of course that makes sense. And then she finds out that Count Dracula invited her to dinner. Remember, he's the guy that murdered Mina, but she doesn't know that. And they just have the best time. They're just laughing and having dinner together, and they're really bonding. And oh, it's just so romantic. And she never finds out that he's the murderer. They're just in love, and we're supposed to just accept that as adorable. It's just, oh, like, what? And in the Coppola version, she does find out that Dracula killed Lucy, and she just kind of like punches him on the back. She's like, oh, you killed Lucy. But then like a minute later, they're making out, and I'm assuming it's because she's the reincarnation of Dracula's wife that she just can't resist him. But it's no, it really just, it makes her kind of unlikable. And and then on top of that, so there are these additional scenes that have them kind of hooking up and bonding, and they just make the Dracula Mina relationship even more creepy than it was in the book, because it starts out with Dracula like kind of stalking her through London, and he's all like, look at me, like from across the street. So he does that whole thing where he like pretends to accidentally bump into her and, oh gosh, I'm so sorry, I'm new here. Could you maybe show me around? And Mina just cuts him off. She's like, yeah, there's a store down the street selling maps. You can get one. She's really clearly uncomfortable with him. And so he uses his vampire powers to just pop up in the next street. And she's like startled, like, what the heck? I thought I just lost you. And he does it again, like, hi, like, I just really want to like get to know you, and you really shouldn't be walking around London without a chaperone, and maybe I could kind of walk around. And Mina freaks out. She's like, yeah, yeah, I'm married, and do you want me to call the police on you? Which, by the way, um her husband is currently imprisoned in Castle Dracula, unbeknownst to her. And Dracula's just like, oh gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize you had a husband. I'll just leave you alone now. I'm like, yeah, you liar. You've got her husband imprisoned. So he starts to walk away, and Mina's like, oh no, sorry, sir. I was the one being rude. No, no, you weren't, Mina. You told him to go away, and he wouldn't leave you alone. And no, but yeah, apparently we're supposed to just accept that Mina was the one being rude. And so they go on a date. Again, her husband is missing, but she still goes on a date with Dracula. And there's a point where he kind of like his desire to bite her just overwhelms him, and he drags her off into this corner, and she's struggling, and he goes to bite her, and she's like, oh, I know you. And it's supposed to be this like, wow, romantic moment, I guess, that, oh, she knows him because she's his reincarnated wife. But it's like, what? So it's okay for him to just grab you like that because you know him? No, no, that's actually, no, that's not okay, actually. Um, but yeah, so that is my biggest deal breaker. If the adaptation has Dracula and Mina in love with each other, I'm like, click with the remote. I am done. I wash my hands of you. And that is it. Other changes frustrate me a lot, and some will also be deal breakers for me, but that is the biggest one. If Dracula is the anti hero who is expected to fall in love with Mina, and also, these movies tend to take out like some of her really cool moments. Like the Coppola movie does have Van Helsing hypnotizing her, but it's Van Helsing's idea, not Mina's idea. And because she's in love with the Count, there is sort of the argument, does she even want that to happen to her? Um, so yeah, it's like I don't like it, and yeah, that is my big deal breaker. So at one point in the book, Van Helsing gathers everybody together, and he kind of breaks down everything that vampires can do and everything they can't do. So just as a quick summary, here are some things that Dracula can and can't do. He can shapeshift in the book. So he doesn't just turn into a bat, he can turn into a wolf or into thick white mist too. He can control animals like wolves or rats. He can control the weather, so he can make storms happen or a mist. He's able to scale walls, like he can crawl down the castle like a lizard. That's how it's described in the book. He is super strong. He is super smart because he's had all this time to accumulate whatever knowledge he wants. And he's immune to pretty much any form of killing except a sacred bullet through the heart, a stake through the heart, or decapitation. Going off of that, some of the things he's limited by are garlic, the wild rose, any kind of Christian relics like the crucifix or the Holy Eucharist. He is weakened by the sunlight in the sense that he can't shapeshift, and some of his powers are limited in the sun. But if he wants to move around in the day, he can. He just needs to go to sleep in a box with his native Transylvania soil. So those are some things he can do. And the movies tend to vary on how they portray what he can and can't do. The Netflix version actually gives him a really interesting ability where he can absorb people's knowledge and their skills by sucking on their blood. So, especially this is prevalent in the second episode with the Demeter, where he's feeding on different passengers and he like feeds on like a German passenger and now he can speak German. Stuff like that, which I think is interesting and I kind of like it, but I also kind of like the more mundane explanation that he's just lived for that long, so he's had that much time to accumulate knowledge. The whole thing with Dracula burning in the sunlight, that it seems was invented by Nosferatu. Now, whether or not it kind of annoys me that a lot of movies keep doing that, but whether or not it really bothers me depends on how much they bring it up in the movie or the TV show. Like the NBC show has this whole subplot where he's trying to find a cure so he can walk around the daylight, and I'm just kind of sitting there like, but he doesn't need that. He's fine. He can do that. And then the Netflix version, it it wouldn't bother me so much, except that one of the things in the Netflix series is that there's a lot of like there's a whole thing with like scoffing over whether or not God really like looks out for people and whether holy symbols can really repel Dracula. They do, but sure, like in the first episode, there's a point where Jonathan holds up a crucifix against one of the brides of Dracula and it has no effect on her. And it just kind of annoys me because of like, if you're gonna take this whole thing where you're gonna say, oh, you thought that thing could work against vampires, but actually it doesn't. I'm like, well, then why don't you take the perfectly good version of that that's in the book? Like, if you want to. If you want to do that, if you want to freak people out with this whole idea that, oh, this or that thing that you thought killed vampires doesn't kill vampires, you've got the sun right there. You could just do that. You could have people think, oh, Dracula will burn the sunlight, and then no, he doesn't. That's very accurate to the book, and it would shock people. And the other thing is that the Netflix Dracula Van Helsing is just like really obsessed with finding out why Dracula is repelled by certain things. She's like, this just doesn't make any sense. Why are you repelled by a crucifix? Why are you repelled by sunlight? Why can't you be allowed in without an invitation? I have to figure this out. And I don't really like that because I feel like it's kind of like taking all the fun out of it. I mean, you might as well ask, like, why is it that Harry Potter can do magic, but his cousin Dudley cannot? It just doesn't make any sense. They're related to each other. It's like, you don't think too hard about this stuff. It's a story. It's fiction. It's a like imagine like at the end of a fairy tale being like, but why did true love's kiss break the spell? It's a fairy tale. You just enjoy it. Like stop trying to make something out of it more than it is. Especially because if you are going to do that, you're going to inevitably disappoint some people. It's like there's always going to be some people that don't agree with your explanation for why something supernatural is the way that it is in the books. I prefer just the mystery of it all, but that's just me, so. For me, an ideal Dracula adaptation is one that gets the characters right because so many of them do not get the characters and their relationship right. They are basically an early example of a found family. You have Jonathan and Mina, the married couple, and you have Arthur and Dr. Seward and Quincy, who are all grieving the loss of Lucy that they all fell in love with, and Van Helsing, who's Seward's mentor and basically adopts all of these adults. They are his kids now, and there is to be no discussion on that. And not many adaptations really capture that found family aspect of this group. And just like looking over all these adaptations, like where is the healthy marriage between the Harkers that's so prevalent in the book? Where is the scene where Jonathan and Mina just collapse in grief because they're so upset over what happened to Mina, and everyone just kind of gets down and goes into a group hug with them? Where is Mina volunteering to transcribe Dr. Seward's diaries, not only so they can have a more complete narrative, but so that no one else has to hear his um, his huge grief over losing Lucy? Like, that was a very private thing for him. And where is Mina comforting Arthur and Quincy over losing Lucy? Like, she specifically goes to Quincy and is like, listen, I wrote to Lucy, like, she and I were very close friends. I know what she was to you, and I know you're suffering just as much as Arthur is. If you need me, I'm here for you. And they, in turn, are so touched by her kindness that they swear they're going to help her get this vampire that attacked her. And, like, where is Van Helsing and Mina have this really sweet, like, father-daughter relationship? He calls her his dear Madam Mina, and he's just in awe of her intelligence. And, I mean, it's not perfect. Like, he says she has a man's brain, which, again, not going to fly in a 2020 adaptation, but it's very sweet. And Jonathan and Mina just vowing to stick together no matter what. And Mina and Lucy's wonderful friendship, and Dr. Seward and Quincy, despite knowing that they lost out on Lucy rejected their marriage proposals, but they're still willing to do whatever it takes to help her. They donate their blood for her to kind of keep her alive as Dracula keeps taking it out. And it's very beautiful, like the friendship between this group. Count Dracula's pretty good, but I don't get the found family vibes from them. And so many of them, like even the Bela Lugosi one, it's a lot of like Van Helsing trying to convince Dr. Seward and Jonathan that this is a real threat over and over again. And that's not even to get into what I mentioned before about all the Mina being in love with Dracula and now like actively working against her friends who are trying to help and seemingly not caring that Lucy's dead. And that's why, even though the masterpiece version of Dracula isn't really not that much like the book, it doesn't follow the plot at all. It has Arthur inviting Dracula to come live in London because he thinks Dracula can cure his syphilis. It's weird. And Arthur's really just a jerk to Lucy and Dr. Seward because he won't tell them what's really going on with him. But it still shows that friendship between Mina and Lucy. It still shows the love that Mina has for Jonathan. It shows the love that Dr. Seward has for Lucy, where he knows something's wrong and he's determined to help her no matter what. And even though they don't really get to know Van Helsing that well, they're still like they kind of come together to bring Dracula down. And so I was so prepared when I first saw that one to hate it like I've hated some of the other ones, and I just couldn't. I don't love it's not a good adaptation, but it at least got the characters and their relationships a little better than some of the other ones. And that's why I don't really like the Netflix one either. It becomes all of these movies just become all about Dracula and what a seductive figure he is, instead of being a story about good people, good ordinary people coming together to fight off this terrible evil that's come into their lives. Yeah, thank you for watching my Dracula rant. I do this every year for my poor friends, and now I figured it would be a good topic for Frustrated Book Purists. So, next month, Miss Sarah will be doing a video, and then I will be doing an end of the year video in December. So, keep an eye out for that. Have a good day.